Paul Tonko, Democrat out of New York, said yesterday, Adam, that he intends to introduce legislation that would put some limits on the advertising practices and different things that are going on in the sports betting industry, which he says a Wild West, largely unregulated environment, Adam, is what Tonko has decided to go with on this one. We are dealing with a massive and growing public health crisis that he says, and his Safe Bet Act that he says he is going to introduce would ban sportsbook advertising during live sporting events, ban language from sportsbook advertisements promoting bonus or no sweat bets, prohibit sportsbooks from accepting credit cards, require sportsbooks to accept no more than 5 deposits from a single customer within a 24-hour period, prohibit gaming operators from using artificial intelligence to track a player's gambling habits or to use AI to create customer-specific prop bets as well. So, listen, this is not the first time that Tonko has come after the gambling industry. Probably won't be the last time, but apparently is going to at least introduce his Safe Bet Act at some point.
Right. He first dropped a bill last year that was intended to address many of these same concerns. And we've spoken to Representative Tonko a couple of times, and what he's been clear about is to say, listen, I don't expect everything within this legislation to become law. I'm trying to start a conversation that needs to be started and try to bring everyone to the table to have a discussion about how we do this better. And look, I agree with him in the idea that it can be done better than it's being done right now. I do push back on the idea of it being the Wild West because we do have a number of state-level regulations that are in place at the moment. To say that there is no regulation is probably an overstatement, but I do think it's reasonable that there is a discussion to be had among all stakeholders about how do we do this in a sustainable way for the long haul moving forward. Because as you mentioned, Matt, earlier when we talked about the League Pass situation, there is a certain segment that will always wring its hands and gnash its teeth when any sort of progress or step forward in the gambling space comes around. There is a fundamental lack of understanding of the amount of regulation that is done on not only sports betting companies, but on casinos throughout the company. Is one of the most heavily regulated industries in the United States at the state level. It is not done at the federal level. It is done at the level of regulators in each state. And that, of course, causes a lot of frustration, I know, among many stakeholders having to operate under a patchwork of different rules. But it also underscores how hard it really is from the federal level to put a one-size-fits-all approach onto the industry, because it does operate in so many different forms in different places. Sports betting in Nevada looks nothing like sports betting in New York, looks nothing like sports betting in Illinois. And so it requires different sets of rules and different sets of regulation to deal with the different needs that the different states have. Because what did we start out with when PASPA was repealed? We started out with this being the Supreme Court saying that this was something where the federal government had taken away the right of states to regulate this for themselves, and it kicked it back to the state level to say, you decide what is the best way to do this for yourself. And so each state now has that ability, and the more we do at the federal level that takes away from that, I believe takes away from the intent that was there in the first place in repealing PASPA. That being said, a representative in Congress beginning this conversation and continuing to push this conversation, I don't necessarily think is a bad thing in the long term. I just think that when we look at the bill as it's written right now, there is certainly more cure in there than there would be prevention.
Yeah, I look at some of the stuff that he said, that he highlighted some of the stuff that he said he's going to put in this, Adam. And like, look, I think that there are conversations to be had around all of the stuff, but I think all of the stuff is basically just painting with a very broad brush, where there's really like, what are we intending to prevent here? And what is the desired result in all of this? I mean, for example, require sportsbook to accept no more than 5 deposits from a single customer within a 24-hour period. Well, Adam, as you and I both know, 5 $10 deposits is completely different than 5 $500 deposits or whatever, or anything like that. It's like it's like a broad stroke thing that is like kind of going on here, which again, I understand these are more just conversation starters and keep things going, but it's just some of this stuff, like people are going to read it and they're going to roll their eyes because it's just, when you say things like no more than 5, whatever, don't allow, the words bonus and no sweat. Okay, well, I mean, then we're just going to come up with new, different ways to promote, ways that you, that casinos are, that the sports books are going to allow you to try the product. I mean, again, it's fine. I like the fact that we're keeping the conversation going. I hate the fact that we're going to like pull out bullet points and say, like, these are the things we're going to go after and these are the things we're going to go do. When it's just painting such this broad brush across something that's much more nuanced than that.
I agree. It's just that there's no other way to do it, right? Like I don't, from his perspective, there's no other way to start that conversation if you don't put something on paper and drop it and then let everybody let people call you all the names they want to call you to say, you don't know what you're doing, 5 deposit. Okay, well then he begins the conversation to say, tell me what the right way is to deal with compulsive behavior in terms of funding an online gambling account. And that is a reasonable discussion to be had. Legislating 5 versus 6 versus $5 bets versus $500 bets, no, that's not a reasonable way to do it at all.
And I guess like I look at the different stuff, like, okay, for example, the banned sportsbook advertising during live sporting events, like what kind of ridiculously slippery slope are we going at then at that point, right? Because now we're saying like you're not supposed to be able to advertise to your most likely and prime customer, because then at that point, I mean, okay, so drug companies shouldn't be able to advertise during the Golden Girls because like that's like predatory. But do you get what I'm saying? I mean, seriously though, it's like that's like the most slippery slope ever, because you're basically saying like, well, no, because these are people who are likely to like your product. Well, if that's the case, then okay, then beer can't advertise during live sporting events. Like I said, drug companies can't do it on the Lifetime channel or the Hallmark channel or whatever. It's just all of these different things like that. I don't know. I can't get down with. I'm all for responsible gaming and doing it correctly and making sure that we are doing as much as humanly possible, but I also need it to make sense.
Well, the question then becomes, okay, so if you ban it during live sporting events on television, what else are you going to do? Right? Like where does the ban stop? Is it going to also be, as previous iterations that he's discussed will it be through any FCC regulated channels? Will there be no internet advertising allowed? Will there be no email advertising allowed? Like there are many different ways that this could end up going. The one thing that I do think is fair to say, though, as we discuss different forms of advertising on different channels and who we're targeting, is that I want to thank you for being a friend, Matt.
Yes, I know.
Travel down the road and back again.
Yeah. Your heart is true. You are a pal and a confidant.
Yeah.
All right, so take us home here with a couple of state notes.
Let's talk about Georgia for a second as we're winding down the session in Georgia. March 28th is the deadline there. Hearing canceled today in the committee where sports betting bills were going to be considered. There have been some tweaks discussed here in the last few days. Remember that this is a bill that passed its first chamber almost 2 months ago and is basically stalled out. It is once again caught up in some other wrangling between the Democrats and the Republicans. It's not impossible. I told you last week, it's not impossible that it gets out, but time is running very, very short to get this done this year. I think there are a lot of stakeholders in Georgia who feel like what they would like to see is something that it can at least be carried forward to next year. Because one source dealing with this said that the way this has been addressed this particular year and the discussion of would it be put to the ballot and the lack of appetite among some of the sports betting operators to go to the ballot in Georgia when they're already going to the ballot most likely in Missouri, and the amount of financial outlay that would take, the overall landscape, one source told our Pat Evans, would set this whole thing back 5 years the way it's being dealt with right now. Could that be hyperbole? Absolutely it could, because we've considered it year after year. But in Georgia, it is really a matter at this point of will the political will ever be there for sports betting to become a big enough issue to not get caught up in the wash with some of the other issues that it has been caught up in. Voting rights, transgender rights, Medicaid, much larger, weightier, meatier issues to be dealt with by the legislature than do you have online sports betting allowed. So we're keeping an eye on what's going on in Georgia. The committee wrangling in Minnesota continues. There's more hope there than I think there was a couple of weeks ago for Minnesota to get something done. They still have time. Their session only began roughly a month ago, so lots of time to still get something done in Minnesota. In Missouri, as I referenced here a moment ago, it is starting to look like that ballot initiative is doing very well with its signature gathering. They told us when they hit the 100,000 mark. They came out with another press release just this week talking about the progress that they're making in Missouri in terms of qualifying sports betting for the ballot. We know that Senator Denny Hoskins has been standing in the way of it, and we know that there was also just a new poll that came out in Missouri showing that more than half of Missourians are in favor of legal sports betting. So it feels as though the momentum is building toward November for Missouri as it is stalled out year after year in the legislature.
Do want to promote one thing over at LSR. Eric Ramsey put together as we head into March Madness season. By the way, sorry if you tuned in to the first 4 games on Tuesday night because gross. But did you see that UVA performance? My goodness. Anyway, he has put together a nice little handy-dandy all-in-one spot summary of what you can and can't do in your state. And some of these states actually do have very unique and interesting rules involving collegiate sports and in-state teams and things like that. I'll just use Connecticut as an example where you can't bet on in-state teams game to game, but you can bet on them as a whole. So you can bet on UConn to win the whole thing. You just can't bet on UConn on a game-to-game basis. Anyway, there's just all kinds of different little nuanced things, Adam, that go on from a collegiate standpoint. And so a really tidy little article over there on LSR by Eric to let you know what you can and can't do in your state as we head into the madness here on Thursday through Sunday.
Yeah, just to add some detail to that, what we did was instead of saying, okay, here it is in all 50 states, because, not a lot of concern about Hawaii, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We went and looked at every state that either had a collegiate team from that state playing or is a state that is going to be hosting some level of the tournament from the first 4 all the way to the final 4. And Eric detailed in painstaking fashion, I might add. This was a labor of love for Eric to work on what is allowed in each state. You'll find that a number of states do restrict betting on in-state teams. We talked about it with St. Peter's when it made its run a couple of years ago, and then they gave voters in New Jersey the opportunity to say, hey, if you didn't like that, you can approve betting on in-state teams. And they said, forget about it. Yeah, the whole setup was really just to do that. And
good.
then, teams in Illinois, we know that a lot of that betting has to be done in person. And so different restrictions for different states. Check it out at LSR.
Yeah, it's a really, really, really good article put together up there. If you want to follow me on the Twitter machine, I'm going to be putting that out as well for everyone to take a look at. Of course, everything we talk about here, you can find over at LegalSportsReport.com. So please go in, read all of the great stuff that Adam and team are getting done over there. If you want to follow Adam at Adam Candee 2 E's No Y, me at Matt Brown M2. And like we said, everything we do absolutely free. So you might as well go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You might as well go ahead and leave a nice little review and help us climb up those charts because we do appreciate that as well. For Adam, I'm Matt. Talk to you guys next week.